This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Thanks for joining me for part 2 of my interview with ChangeMaker Adrianne Todman. She is the CEO of NARO, the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and before that, she was the executive director at the DC Housing Authority, where she created an award-winning model to house homeless veterans. Adrianne, in the first part of our discussion, you mentioned the impact you've had in the industry. But for people who aren't familiar with this issue, why is affordable housing so important?
So I will say that affordable housing is far more in public discourse than it has been certainly throughout my career. And I would suspect if I'd been in this career longer, then too. It was amazing to see questions about affordable housing and even better responses that included affordable housing as solutions during the presidential debates that we saw over the past year and then some. We are hearing more now about the importance of affordable housing tied to creating resilience for families that are hurt by this pandemic. Affordable housing being part of the solutions tied to race and equity issues that continue to be unearthed, but really catapulted by the killing of George Floyd. It is there. What I find though is how to come at it. So you have one group of folks that are really, really willing and able to throw federal dollars, local dollars, state dollars to help in increase the supply and to improve access. You have another group of individuals who think that that's great, but not sustainable, and we really need to bring in the private sector to make this work, or it should be private sector driven to begin with. I think it's all good. However we get there, we should get there, whether it's public-private partnerships, whether it is fully funding a $7 billion backlog with federal funds. I'm not going to fuss a whole lot about how the investment gets made. We're just going to keep fighting to make sure the tools and the money is there to make the investment.
Well, in a lot of cases here, this national pandemic, you've seen people recognize how vulnerable everybody is. It's not just the people who are in affordable housing, who need it, who are on waiting lists, who came from it, whatever spectrum it is. It's also just like the economic tide can turn so fast and swoop up so many people. The touch points are so large here that the vulnerability is really exposed, which is obviously what affordable housing can actually step in and provide some solutions in that space. So I mean, it's just fascinating to me that affordable housing is part of the solution in the discussion here on economic stability. But you also mentioned this more of a societal place that affordable housing has been in as well. And whether it's the discussion on race, inequality, injustice, privilege, even the role that affordable housing is kind of going through these conversations as well. And I want to ask you, do you think that housing providers, do you really think that there is a role to be in that solution making space for us, for everybody in who
Right.
are in this affordable housing space?
So I'll go back to something that you mentioned, which is the pandemic has made it clear that the need for affordable housing isn't necessarily just for very low income people. And I will say that one of the things that being in this job has done is it's exposed me to the rest of this big old country that we have here. And whenever I'm either at the airport or I'm in a cab or an Uber driving to the meeting, the conference, the session that I'm at, no matter where I am, Utah, Montana, and I start with those two intentionally, Nebraska, no matter where I've been, where I've never been before, everybody talks about the need, their own personal housing needs. And while you know it, you see some of the numbers, I have not yet been anywhere in this country where somebody said, I'm good, we're good, she's good, they're good, nothing to see here. Even in places that we think it's not New York, it's not LA, it's not DC, even in places where we think it's working, people have affordable housing needs up and down the middle class spectrum, period. And this pandemic has exposed that. The writing of the last 2 weeks has exposed how housing has played a role in sustaining systemic racism in this country, but also it will and can and should play a role in the healing that comes from that. And, I've spent a lot of time over the past 2 weeks talking to my members from all across the country, some of whom are moved beyond words of what they're seeing happen, and all of whom are trying to say, how do we make this better? How do we as housers help make this better? And so we're having those conversations now. We're having it inside of NARA. We're having it with our external partners. In fact, tomorrow we're having a session with some of the past presidents with NARA to talk about housing equity and race and the role that housers play and community development professionals play. And then we're going to move from talking to doing. So we're building these toolkits to make sure that our members are able to be part of the solutions at home. And then beyond that, we're also looking at what are the policies that we need that helps the public housing program, the voucher program really become stronger tools to help families succeed. And so we're coming at it at all different ways. It is sometimes quiet and hard work, and it will sometimes be more forceful and vocal work, but it's certainly the work that they all want us to do.
So I want to talk about some of that NARA work. I mean, you guys have what, 20,000 agencies and professionals that you represent, about 8 million people throughout the country. And you have now a platform to, like you said, not just talk, but then be able to do. And I'm sure that you get a wide spectrum of people, the diversity between everything from coast to coast. And how do you bring everybody together to try to get into that solution making mode, especially
Right,
with such different interests, state by
right.
state and agency by agency?
I mean, if I had the answer to that, I should get the Pulitzer, right? That's the question of the ages, at least the question of the past several days and weeks. But it's so one, you have to expose people to information that they ordinarily didn't care to look at or chose not to have access to. You have to help people vent who are frustrated and who are angry, have a safe place to vent. And then you need to find commonality in terms of what's important. I think the one thing that I know about NARA members is that they care about their communities. They absolutely do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the work that they are. So, how do you frame issues that are experienced differently through the lens of a common experience? And I think that common experience is love of community and home. And if that love of community and home is overarching, then we can find ways to make sure that everybody sees that they have a place in making us just a strong, and maybe it's our little part of the world, our little niche, but just being part of a better place for people to live.
So I want to read a couple of awards that you've received. Can you talk about a person here who is making a better place to live? But you have found a unique ability to sort of in your career progression here come to this point. But I want to read these awards. These are so impressive. It says that you have co-founded the Women in Housing Leadership Initiative. You currently serve on the Smith College Board of Trustees and the Alumni Association. You were also named Woman of Influence by Housing Wire. You've received the Federal Distinguished Service Award, the Hammer Award from the Vice President Al Gore, the Naro Herman Award of Excellence, and the DC Building Industry Association's Government Partner Award. And I'm sure I just have a few of these. Very impressive leader here. That how did you do this? Did you just sort of natural progression? Did you always know what you wanted to do here? I mean, because this part of you leading now, there's so much of it that's wrapped around in who you are. So give our listeners here on this podcast a glimpse of that.
So I will make every graduate of 2020 happy to say that none of it was planned, right? So anybody who's feeling a little lost right now, it was absolutely not planned. I think that most people who know me know that I grew up a little island girl in St. Thomas in U.S. Virgin Islands, which is will for always be home, and had a wonderful, wonderful childhood there. And when it was time for higher education, made the choice to leave St. Thomas and to attend Smith College, which was one of the best choices I ever made. And people to this day will say, what is it about being in St. Thomas makes anybody want to live in Western Massachusetts? And I will suggest that if I was more worldly then, I don't know if I would have made a Western Massachusetts choice, but for who I was and the access to information that I had, because keep in mind, there was no internet. I mean, I'm sure at my age, there was no internet. There was no, but for me and my family, we didn't have the means to leave the island and do college tours. That wasn't part of my experience. So I applied to a couple colleges and got into to all of them. I'm grateful to say, and chose Smith. And Smith is as much as my upbringing in St. Thomas has made me very much the leader and person that I am today. Enjoyed Smith. Always knew I wanted to live in Washington D.C. from the point I was an 11th grader in high school. And I participated in a program, one of those like civic week-long programs for high schoolers here in DC, and knew I was going to come back. And I did. And I got an internship on the Hill with the then congressman from the Virgin Islands, Ron DeLugo. And they hired me to be a legislative assistant, and just really opened up the world in terms of how things get done at the grown-ups table working on the Hill. And he retired and I left there and was very lucky to secure a job at HUD at the time. And I'd worked on as an LA and legislative director. You tend to be an expert on all and master of none when you're a Hill staffer. And so I'd worked on housing issues by virtue of things that my boss was interested in. And so HUD seemed like as good a place to land as anything, but it was not like intentional, like I am going to go and I am going to do some affordable housing. None of that. It was, oh, this is a good job. and really had the great joy of working there when Secretary Henry Cisneros was at the helm, and talk about an amazing time, an energizing time, an idea provoking time to be inside those four walls, and just fell in love, with the idea, the concept of this thing that is housing. And worked there, ran the Hope 6 competition for a couple of years, and went to work with Andrew Cuomo when he was the secretary of HUD, and had an amazing time during his tenure as well. And then left and consulted for a little bit, and then landed at the DC Housing Authority, which is where I spent probably the most formative part of my career thus far. And if I loved the concept of housing then, when it was theoretical and paper driven, living it, worrying about it, sometimes even shedding tears of joy and concern about it over by running it, was again ending up where I began. Was there was no looking back at that point. But the people working with them, and I think that's one thing about this job that if it were to be perfect, would be working more closely with families again, because they energized the why. They energize. Why do you get up every day and you do this? They help to energize the why. So I live vicariously through my members and the work that they do. And I'm so proud of the work that they do. And yeah, that was my journey.
Well, your leadership and personality have definitely been uniquely blended with your experience. And so for you to be on the national platform right now more than ever before, we are very happy that you are there. Quadell, we've actually won 2 national NARO awards for 2 of the programs we do, one in Memphis and one in Phoenix. And NARO gives a platform for us to share in some of these experiences. And you have so many members that are sharing. And I think you'll have to take your enthusiasm from interacting with families from some of the award-winning
Uh,
recipients
Oh,
that bring.
I absolutely do. Like I said, I have had a thrill learning all of the different housers and development experts out there that I never would have met if I had not been in this job. Like never would have met them. And they thrill me to no end. And I find great inspiration in making sure that the work I do here in DC is helping them to succeed. They are truly my inspiration now.
Well, and that enthusiasm when you hear of the recipient of the Family Self-Sufficiency Program,
Right.
when they
Oh,
get
yeah.
their escrow for home ownership, I mean, the rooms, they just sit there and you're just all in tears and you're weeping. And
Yeah.
it's such a moment that you just treasure. So I know what you say when you're talking about that's probably the only. Well, it's probably not the only downside, but it's probably one of the things that you definitely miss. But we'll keep in the field here. We'll keep moving those on to you so
There
you
you
can
go.
share
There
those.
you go. There, yeah. Send me videos. Send me
Yeah, so
videos, people.
right, so you can have the touch points of all of those pieces that you might miss. So, well, thank you so much. I think that you are such a treasure for all of us and what you're doing in this space because we have a lot of work to do, but you guys have it packaged and ready. It's like it's in the queue right here. You know the capital improvements, what's needed, the funding, we have a structure to facilitate that. It's all right there in the queue. So I'm glad that you're at the forefront for many of us.
Thank you again, and thanks for the invitation.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadell.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.